There are jurors and alternates every term. Mr. Durst is present with his counsel. People are represented as well.
Mr. McCormack,
We've got some, just one moment before we start. Got some water for a juror. All right, you may continue your examination, Mr. Garrett.
People's Exhibit 24 is still on the screen. And what I want to ask you is, without saying what anybody said to you, did you get some of this information from Detective Strzok?
Some of it, as reported to him by others, wasn't necessarily me, but I'll say that that's
I
probably...
mean, I'm not asking you what somebody else said to him, due to a ruling by the court. So I'm not asking for that. But did you get this information, at least in part, from Detective Strzok?
I would say yes.
Okay. Specifically, the last seen wearing full-length beige down coat and suede brown boots. Did you get that from Detective Strzok?
I believe so, because Detective Strzok would have gotten that information from Robert Durst.
Again, I'm not asking you what he said to you or where he said he got the information. But
Just
that's what
listen, I'm sorry. Will you please just listen to the question and answer only the question? You may continue.
Okay.
Pardon me.
You're aware, aren't you, that the Dursts at about the same time posted a $100,000 reward for information leading to the whereabouts of Kathie?
Yes.
Okay, we can take that down. I don't know how to do it. There it up on your- okay, there we go. In the early stages of your sister's disappearance, you worked hard on trying to help the investigation, didn't you?
Best I could.
And you had available to you and you reviewed, for instance, telephone records.
Could you explain, sir?
Did you? Did you have available, did you review and have available to you telephone records?
I don't recall.
Specifically, did you supply the investigators with telephone records from the South Salem house?
I did not.
Or telephone records from the Riverside Drive house?
I did not.
Did you review them yourself and supply the investigators with what you had reviewed?
That question's compound and assumes two facts. not
Okay, let me
evidence.
break it down. Did you supply the investigators with what you'd found?
That again.
Just
assumes
objection
facts, not
and
evidence.
objection and grounds. What are you saying? Assumes a fact, not an evidence?
Yes.
Sustained.
Fact, not as evidence? I want
Yes.
to understand the ruling of the court.
Okay, that's the ruling. Next question.
Okay. Did you develop your own timeline on what you believed had happened? Who Kathie had talked to, who she had telephoned, and so forth?
Not at that time, no.
At what time did you do that?
Over the 38 years of pain and suffering in our family, I put together my own timeline.
Well, may I approach the witness and see if I can refresh his recollection?
The witness
He
has not
hasn't-
said that he.
I'm sorry. That's my line. The witness has not said that he fails to recall.
Do you recall typing out, I call it a timeline of things that you had from reviews of the telephone records?
I don't recall.
May I see if I can refresh his recollection, Your Honor?
Could looking at a document possibly refresh your recollection as to whether
That's
you...
possible.
You may approach the witness, Mr. DeGarra.
Without reading this out loud, Mr. McCormack, if you look at this, at several pages.
Let me see.
Yes, sir.
And after you read it, just answer the question whether it refreshes your recollection without saying anything more.
Okay. Can I hear that again, sir?
Look it over, and if it helps you recall, just say that it does, but don't tell me anything else. Don't read it out loud or answer the previous question. Just look at it and see if your recollection is refreshed.
The markings in blue ink are mine. No. Don't be distracted.
Am I asked whether I typed this or?
No.
Does this refresh your recollection as to what took place? It may or may not.
Your Honor, can the court briefly take a look at one of the pages that Mr. DeGuerin is using to refresh recollection? I think the court might want to see this page.
Anything can refresh recollection. If it happens to refresh recollection. He's not going to testify to the contents of any of these pages.
Then I'm trying to figure out what the relevance would be at this. What's he?
That's a different question.
Well, Your Honor, at this point in time, what would the relevance be of this
Yeah, I don't
question?
know.
What's he refreshing his recollection about? It would seem that unless he's going to have him testify about the timeline, there would be no relevance and/or 352. That would be the objection I would impose. I'm trying to be
Okay.
patient.
Well, I
The
hear
relevance is the sequence of phone calls.
sequence of phone calls, not his phone calls, but
Kathie's
he's-
phone calls and Bob's phone calls.
all right, I'll sustain the objection.
Page one.
He's looking at phone records.
He's looking at no, Your Honor, something that I believe the witness wrote.
That's not been established and is actually incorrect. But
No, I haven't had a chance to ask it yet.
Okay, so I'll hear the question, but I'm skeptical. So he's looked them over. You may take them back.
Actually,
and
he's only looked at the
Okay.
first 3
It
pages.
is not here.
Your Your Honor, may I quickly get a squirt of the Purell?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
I apologize for my desire to get to the truth here. It scares pretty soon.
Already is.
How many pages are you asking him to read, Mr. DeGarren?
It's about 8 or 10. I can put on the record the LADA base numbers for the judge. It begins.
Doesn't matter. I don't have those. I don't keep track of that. But thank you. Let's, while he looks at that, why don't you return to the lectern and why don't you return to the lectern? You'll get your papers back. I think I might have you pause before you go to the rest of it. I'm not sure this is, your question is about a timeline that he created after looking at phone records, like phone bills?
Well, it's not only the phone records, but yes, it is a timeline, and I believe I can ask him now, isn't that something that he created originally?
Probably should have been the first question, Your Honor, is an offer of proof he did not create the timeline.
Okay, so did you create a
I
timeline?
didn't read this. No.
Did you create any timeline?
No, I never did this.
Okay.
So that's not your handiwork?
No.
Let's,
I mentioned in here, but I did not
Are you
create this.
familiar with it?
Not to the degree of detail, no.
okay, why don't you set that aside for a moment? Let's go to another area that might be more productive.
Well, does it serve to refresh your
I
recollection?
think he's still reviewing.
You can put that aside just for now. We'll go back, we may go back to that.
Does it refresh your recollection about information that you helped develop and provided? That's two questions. That you helped develop.
Your Honor, that would be irrelevant. It would certainly be 352 if not irrelevant.
So your objection is, say objection?
Relevance, 352, and also
Sustained.
based on speculation.
Sustained.
No foundation.
Well,
Thank you, Mr.
I
Bailey.
believe that what he said,
Didn't mean to empty the gun, Your Honor. I wasn't sure.
Save it for the next
Give you the
one.
first shot skid.
Okay, but,
we got into the refreshing recollection about what he did and what he provided to the investigators.
all right, and that's, so go ahead and see if there's
Does this-
anything else.
Serve to refresh your recollection about the information that you provided to the investigators.
Not specifically to this timeline, but are you asking me, did I visit with the investigators? Did I meet with them, talk, communicate with them? What is your question, sir?
Yes. Does this serve to refresh your recollection about the substance of the information that you provided for the investigators?
Not specifically, no.
Does it refresh your recollection about some of the information you provided to the investigators?
I would say if I finish reading this thing, there might be some things in there, but there's a lot,
Okay.
there's a lot more than 8 pages.
Yes, and that's why I gave you all of it. Let's establish it this way. During the initial investigation, the first 6 months that Kathie was missing, you provided information as best you could to what you knew and what you developed, didn't you?
Yes,
Okay. There came a time later when an investigator reopened the case, a person named Joe Becerra,
correct.
and you provided much of the same information to him, didn't you?
Yes, that's correct. Truth doesn't change.
Well, thank you for that. And the truth is that it included telephone records that you had developed and reviewed.
Your Honor, that lacks foundation. There's no evidence that the witness developed phone records.
Okay.
There will
So-
be
so-
once he says it.
Right. Did you give him phone records, phone bills, or anything like that?
I don't recall giving phone bills to anybody.
Okay, go ahead.
Did
Next.
you give a summary of the phone records? to both Mr. Becerra later and to Mr. Struck, but originally?
I did not give anything to Dick relative to phone records to Becerra. I didn't have them. And as far as Detective Struck, a lot of any information communicated to him was directed through my sister Mary and Geraldine, who were literally at the epicenter of the investigation.
And I'm going to ask you again, and thank you, but let's continue to listen carefully to the question and answer only the question that's presented to you. You may continue.
Do you recall sending a letter to Joe Becerra in March of 2000 in which you enclosed telephone records?
I don't recall it. I could have done that, but I don't recall it.
And if I show you a letter from you, might that refresh your recollection?
I'm sure it would.
Oh, yeah?
You may.
When I see the letter, Your Honor, I might have a relevance objection.
I could offer it as evidence. I'll show it to refresh your recollection. This is just a one-page letter. If you'd look at that, please, sir, and see if that refreshes your recollection about my last question to you. Did you send some records to Joe Becerra?
And again, the answer is whether it refreshes it or not. That's the only
That's a yes or
question.
no.
Yes.
So now with your recollection refreshed, do you now remember that you did send a letter to Joe Becerra that included some telephone records?
But at this, yes.
Okay. Now, the stuff that I gave you originally to refresh your recollection, does that contain some of the same material that you sent to Joe Becerra?
I don't know.
That's not relevant. It's given to him to refresh, so it's not evidence. So sustained, stricken.
All right, what do I do with this, Judge?
That's yours, take it.
I've got another copy.
Would you like, do you need him to refer to it again?
I do.
Okay, you may leave it there on the witness stand and you may return to the lectern.
There's a page that you just flipped up in front of the witnesses. You need to look at something, or?
Well, there's about 10 pages up there, and if I'm going to ask him to look at something, I wanted to isolate it for him so he wouldn't have to go through 10 pages.
Okay, we'll see.
Can I approach and see what page that is, Your Honor?
Yeah, you can both approach.
I'll just...
Both approach.
Thank you.
Is there any objection to this, Mr. Lewin, to going through this phone record with him? Yes?
Well, I think, Your Honor, relevance in 352, but I'm trying to be
I understand.
patient, breathe, et cetera, so I'm...
All right.
I'm listening to the court, Your Honor.
Enjoy. Okay. So, Mr. Guerin, you may continue.
Okay, now, I think we're at the point where you now remember that you did send some information to Joe Becerra that included some phone records.
Yes, apparently, according to that letter you showed to me.
Well,
Yes.
you don't dispute that that's your letter, do you?
Yeah, I don't see a signature on it, but yes, that's mine.
Okay, so, here's where we are. You sent to Joe Becerra and to other investigators earlier in the case information concerning the phone calls that were made by Kathie and made by Bob. Isn't that right? Right around the time of January, late January and early February.
Phone calls that had not yet been made, late January?
No. No, sir.
That's what these dates are, they're February.
There are phone calls that begin in mid-January and records that go on into February. Isn't that what you supplied to Investigator Becerra and also years earlier to the investigators for New York homicide?
I can only answer that as a possibility. I can't guarantee a definitive answer.
Well,
I mean,
that
you know,
refresh your
life
memory?
is not yes or no.
You know, we interject at this point a relevance objection. The relevance would not be the.
Yeah, no, understand. Sustain. He mailed records, he mailed phone records.
You know, just so it's clear, we already have a stipulation that phone records themselves can be offered. So I'm, under 3.2, I'm not exactly understanding how the witness discussing phone records that he could not have compiled, because he's not the phone company, I'm not getting.
Right. I think what Mr. DeGuerin's established is that Mr. McCormack got these phone records, phone bills is what he would have, I imagine, and mailed them to the detective, and that's fine. As far as how they were produced, who made them, when, I don't see how he can testify about that. But he took an interest in, obviously, and sent these records.
well, let me get it this way, perhaps. Did you and/or your sister Mary Hughes review reams of telephone records?
At that time, I'm sure we did.
Okay. And did you pick out from those reams of telephone records phone calls that were made from the South Salem house on the Friday before Kathie disappeared, and telephone calls that were made from the South Salem house in the days beginning February 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, and 5th?
Very possibly, yes.
Possibly, if you refresh your recollection, isn't that what you sent to Becerra and sent to the detectives before?
It would seem so according to what you're showing here, yes.
Okay. All right, now I want to ask you a couple of things about that. You said that Bob Durst contacted you on February the 4th, right?
I believe so, yes.
And one of the things that you said about that was that it was a very brief phone call.
Just appeared brief. I mean, the memory has been, you know, clouded by time, but I recall it being relatively brief and, you know, kind of like.
Well, the record that you sent to the investigators established that the phone call was 10 minutes long, didn't it?
Is that what's here? 10 minutes, it shows 10 minutes here, yes.
Okay. Now, that's not a brief phone call, is it?
But my wife took the call.
And gave it to you.
Well, I don't know how much time she spent on the call with him.
Fair enough. And you developed that Kathie had made some calls on the Friday of January the 29th, right?
Well, from the records that you scanned,
Yeah.
yes.
In fact, one of them was a call that was an hour and a half to your mother,
That's very, very probable.
and another one was a call that was about 66 minutes long to Dean Cooperman. You
On the
believe?
Friday.
That's
Yes.
objection, hearsay,
Sustained.
motion to strike any answer in the question. Also, Your Honor, at this point in time, unless Mr. DeGuerin makes a legitimate offer of proof.
Okay, no, I've sustained the objection.
Well, did you say that that was what you believe the call was?
Objection, relevance, witness's
Sustained.
opinion.
Did you tell the investigators?
Same objection, Your Honor.
Sustained.
Okay, so the record that you supplied to the investigators showed that the call to you, or to your number, was 10 minutes long, on February the 4th, right?
According to this, the phone call, including my wife, Bob, and then me, according to this, is 10 minutes.
And the information you provided also showed that there was a phone call to Susan Berman
Your Honor,
on February the 1st.
Your Honor,
Sustained.
that's been a call for
Fourth,
hearsay.
excuse
Your Honor,
me.
I'm also, the problem is, Mr. DeGuerin is asking questions that he knows contain inadmissible evidence in a way to get
I
these
don't
things.
know, I
in-
think all this stuff is, he's not the right witness for these things. So,
Your Honor, then can the court admonish
Your Honor, this
Mr.
is
DeGuerin
what-
not to ask the
he
question?
doesn't have the foundation for this, Mr. Garen, so sustain.
Your Honor,
Foundation.
am I on trial here?
No, you're doing fine, Mr. McCormack. No, we're having an evidence question about what evidence is appropriate
I
here.
understand, I
And
understand.
if you send some phone records, that's one thing. I don't think you're an expert on those phone records or what they mean.
Not at all.
So,
What
that's
we're trying to
fine.
establish, Judge,
Yeah.
is what he told the investigators. This was an investigation that he came to believe was not thorough, and I want to establish.
Right, so, objection sustained.
In all of your review of the phone records, you found no phone record between Bob Durst and Susan Berman before February the 4th.
Objection,
Isn't
hearsay,
that-
last
Sustained.
foundation.
Sustained.
You told the investigators that the first phone call.
Your Honor, same objection. Your Honor,
Yeah, sustained.
What he told the investigators, Judge, is.
Your Honor, at this
Okay,
point.
time out, hold on. Time out. Okay, so you may call other witnesses to contradict whatever point you want to contradict, but this is, he's not the, you don't have the foundation for him to answer questions about that nature of these phone calls, when they were made. The fact that he put them in an envelope and sent them to the detective is, or even if he discussed it with the detective.
It's a prior statement of the witness, Your Honor, in the form of.
It has to be inconsistent or consistent for a prior statement to be admissible. He's not given me such a ground.
Well, did you or not tell the investigators that Bob called Susan Berman for the first time on February the 4th?
Same objection, hearsay.
Sustained.
Foundation.
Well, if I'm going to prove it's either prior consistent or inconsistent, I have to establish what he did or didn't say.
Prior consistent or inconsistent with what's been testified to previously.
You know,
You
also-
can't invent something just for the sake of introducing a consistent statement. So
Also
sustained.
relevance in 352, Your Honor, which will eliminate the issue to go into.
Sustained.
Thank you.
Certainly relevant when
Sustained.
Susan Berman was contacted.
Okay. Sustained.
I need to get that back so I can.
You may, yes, you may.
Come get it.
Just so we can make sure we have this established, do you concede that the typewritten things that I showed you, to refresh your recollection, was a document that was created by you?
The letter
Mhm.
to Joe Becerra,
Well, that, but also what I just showed you, that has the summary of telephone records in it.
I do not recall creating those 12 pages. I don't recall that at all.
Your Honor, the same relevant.
I'm sorry?
352 objection.
Yeah, well, sustained.
Your Honor, people would also, we have a relevance 352 objection. Any further inquiry in this area?
Yeah, right.
Thank you, Your Honor. Can the court admonish Mr. DeGuerin to move on to a new area?
I don't know what else he can do.
If I can't go into this, I've got to move on. You mentioned on direct examination that when you talked to Detective Struck in the weeks following your sister's disappearance, you recorded some of those phone calls.
On my phone. Telephone, there were telephonic recordings, yes.
Yes. That's what-
At least one.
And what did you do with those recordings?
I gave them, I thought originally I gave them to the FBI, but originally, I recalled giving them to Jarecki and Smerlin, who created the Jinx.
Okay, so you don't have them anymore.
No, I don't have them, no.
And so, I guess that establishes one of my other questions. When Jarecki and Smerling and the group that they make movies with interviewed you, when was that?
Well, the first time they reached out to me was right after, because it was a protracted length of time. First time they reached out to me was right after the not guilty decision down at Galveston. I still have the original email. And
So that would have been in November of 2003?
No, later than that, 2004 or 2005. But Mark Smerling wrote the email.
Let me clarify something with you. The verdict of not guilty in Galveston was November the 11th, 2003.
Yeah, I know, I literally fell down. Go ahead.
So listen, just listen, answer only the question though.
Okay, yes. Yeah, I remember that, yes.
Okay. So is that when Smerling and Jarecki contacted you? Or
No.
was it after that?
After that.
How long after that?
2004, I believe it was, possibly 2005. I would have to refresh myself.
Was it before or after their movie, All Good Things?
It was before the movie.
All right. Were you interviewed in that movie?
Not interviewed in the movie. I supplied information, family dynamics, and recollections of the relationship between Bob and my sister Kathie.
Okay, so you didn't appear in the movie?
No, I didn't, that I could recall, no. I mean, maybe, no, I don't think I appeared at the end where there was some interviews.
All right, not the movie that was shown in theaters or wherever it was shown, but in the also included stuff.
You mean at the movie, and then at the end of the movie, there's kind of a director's add-ons? Yeah. I don't remember being interviewed on the back end of that, but it's possible.
And then you were interviewed at length by Mr. Jarecki on camera?
For the Jinx? Yes.
Okay. When were you interviewed for the Jinx?
On numerous occasions, probably 2000, let me think, 2012, 2013, that time frame.
Okay.
At home, at work.
If you know, by the time you were interviewed, were Jarecki and Smerling, the producers of the Jinx, providing information to the district attorney's office?
I do not know.
Relevance.
Sustained.
I believe it was covered in their opening statement, Your Honor.
Doesn't matter. It's not relevant to this witness's testimony.
Is that the ruling?
Pardon me?
Was that
That's the ruling, yes. He's, no. The objection is sustained.
Let me go to a different subject. Were you aware of the problems that Kathie was having in medical school?
I was not aware of any problems at medical school, no.
Did you ever talk to any of her, for instance, did you ever talk to Dean Cooperman?
No.
Did you ever talk to Dean Cook? He has a French name, it's Jean, spelled Jean, Jean, Cook, who was her direct faculty advisor.
No, I have no recollection.
Okay. And I presume you haven't seen any of the records of what her progress or lack of progress in school?
Recently, I saw some documents, but they were basically telling me when I read them that Kathie was getting decent grades. She had some interruptions due to some stresses that she was experiencing. But she was back on track and on target to graduate.
Who showed you those records?
It was in a civil case,
What civil case?
case in Nassau County.
That you brought or that your sister?
My sister's brought it. I did not bring that case.
Okay, and you did not join the lawsuit that your sisters filed against Mr. Durst and a bunch of other people, right?
No,
But you filed a suit yourself, right?
no.
Okay. So, were you shown the record, for instance, that said that she had been making a number of ridiculous excuses for
Hearsay,
absences?
relevance, foundation.
So this is, he overruled. This is testing his lay opinion that he rendered earlier about her progress.
Were you shown that particular record that was written by one of her supervising doctors that she was?
Can you explain shown?
Your Honor, we would ask an offer proof as to
Yeah, show the document.
and the date of the document.
Yeah, let's see the document. In other words, describe this document so we know what we're talking about.
I can describe it better, a little quicker than I can get to
Yes.
it. The document was a note from one of the doctors who was responsible for teaching her.
Dated
She
when?
had a number of unexcused absences or absences for which she had given ridiculous excuses.
Dated
Shown that.
when? For relevance, Your Honor. They
First-
need-
Okay.
It goes to his statement that she was doing well.
All right, so I'm going to sustain the objection. Find the document because you're saying ridiculous excuses, and I don't think I saw that document. I don't think it says ridiculous.
No.
So you may produce the document and
We'll
see if it
produce it.
changes his opinion that she was on track.
For the record, that document will be produced with further testimony down the line.
Yeah, it was in Dr. Cooperman's.
That's fine. Just find it and show it to him.
What frequency of contact did you have with, personal contact did you have with Kathie in, let's say, October, November, December, and January of the year before she disappeared? October, November, December of 1981, January of 1982.
Would have been probably more telephonic than in person. Kathie was dedicated to getting a degree. She was not available. She was doing what they...
Unresponsive.
Yeah, well,
Okay,
the answer is probably once a month. It's an estimate.
Okay. And was that personal contact or telephonic contact?
It'd be personal.
Okay. Were you aware that she was using cocaine?
That's going to, Your Honor,
I'm sorry.
foundation, assumes facts not in evidence.
Foundation is
Hearsay.
what a number of her friends.
Question's also vague, I get my objections, it's vague as to timing, and therefore it's irrelevant. And 352, and some other evidence code sections I haven't mentioned.
Overruled.
So do you remember the question after all
There
that?
was my sister Kathie using cocaine.
Yes. Were
I was
you
aware.
Huh? You were aware? You didn't approve.
Well, let's put it in the context of the times.
Well, sure. And everybody knows that in the early 80s, there was a lot of cocaine being
In the
used.
70s, the 60s, I'm a child of the 60s and 70s. I wasn't a cocaine abuser or user for that matter. It's
I
Kathie.
didn't ask you that, but
Well, I understand.
I'm going to ask you that.
Truth, I'm just
One of
giving
them.
the truth.
Yeah, we can't both talk at the same time.
I understand.
Because of the court reporter. But you didn't approve of Kathie's use of cocaine, did you?
Objection relevance is to his approval. And if not, then certainly 352.
Yeah, overruled.
My answer is I'm not judgmental.
Okay. Were you concerned that it might interfere with her ability to do whatever she needed to do to graduate?
No,
Were you concerned, you knew that night of January 31st, she went to a party at Gilberta Najami's house, didn't you?
After the fact, I found it out.
And you knew that she was drinking wine and using cocaine there.
Your Honor, that's going to assume facts, not an evidence, so I was going to
Okay.
call it hearsay.
Well, let me ask it this way.
Your Honor, I'm going to ask that the jury be instructed, now we're getting out
Okay,
inflammatory
then-
statements by
okay.
Mr. DeGuerin.
Mr. Lewin.
If he's asking
Make
for a
it,
good
no,
faith
I don't
basis.
want speaking objections, and I don't want requests phrased in that way. Jury knows by now their role. You may ask your question again, please.
If Kathie were to start a new rotation on early Monday morning, it would not be good for her to be drinking and using cocaine into the evening 50 miles away from where she had to go to school, would it?
That assumes facts, not an
Sustained.
evidence, calls for speculation.
Sustained.
Where did Gilberta Najami live?
In Connecticut,
How far away is that from Kathie's school in the Bronx?
I don't know.
I'm not asking for an actual mileage, but,
Well, you asked how far.
yeah, I did ask that, and that's my fault. In time, how long would it take to either drive that way or go on the train from Gilberta's house or the South Salem house to where she had to go for her class the next morning?
I do not know.
Have you ever made the trip?
I have not.
Okay. So back to the question. It wouldn't be a good thing for her to be drinking and drugging on the night before she was to start a new rotation at medical school, would it?
Objection assumes facts, not an evidence, calls for speculation.
Irrelevant.
You may answer.
No, irrelevant is sustained.
Oh, I'm sorry, I thought you said overruled.
No, it is sustained. Do not ask.
Now, I'm not asking you exactly what, or anything as the content of what Mr. Struck, the detective, told you about his investigation, but you did have a number of meetings with him after the investigation, didn't you?
During the
Excuse me,
investigation.
during the investigation.
Yes.
And did he answer your questions?
Most times, no. He would just basically say, we're following up whatever
Motion to
leads.
strike, everything is now is non-responsive.
Yeah, I'll strike everything after no.
Okay.
Okay, not what he said, but did he give you information?
No,
None at all.
he had nothing to share with me.
Not even some of the stuff that you put in your flyer.
Relative
Didn't you
to-
tell us before that some of that stuff came from Detective Struck?
Some of it, yes, just phone number, et cetera.
There was a period of time, wasn't there, Mr. McCormack, when Kathie and Bob seemed to be happy?
Yes,
You visited them a couple of times in Vermont where they had the natural food store.
that's correct.
They seemed to be happy there.
Yes,
They led a rather bucolic life.
it's a good description, yes.
I think you mentioned in your direct testimony that, and I'm not sure whether you said Seymour or whether you said the Durst organization demanded that Bob move back to New York.
Well, Seymour basically was Durst organization. Seymour made a demand, that's his
That's going to
son.
call for speculation and hearsay without a further offer of proof as to first-hand knowledge. Motion to strike any answer.
Well, that was on direct examination.
Overruled.
And even then, Kathie and Bob had a good life at the beginning in New York, didn't they?
Yes.
They first lived at the house in South Salem on the lake.
No,
Was it 86th Street?
no.
Okay, where?
They lived in Katona.
I'm sorry?
The Katona house. They called it Katona.
of
Seymour's
course.
Estate House. That's what the way it was. That was the phrase.
When they had that rather unusual arrangement where both Douglas and his wife and Bob and his wife were living in the same house.
Yep.
That wasn't a good arrangement, was it?
Chemistry was not good.
And you knew that there was a bad relationship between Douglas and, you could see that there were.
I observed, but I didn't know.
But you observed that there was a bad relationship between Bob and Douglas. But so then they got the house in South Salem.
Yeah, about 76 or 77, Kathie found a house in South Salem on Lake Truesdale, another lake name, Hoyt Street. And she went to town decorating the place and laying tile. She was so proud. And she put down a tile floor all by herself in the kitchen.
And it was a nice place, but
Yeah, I would go up there and I would do chores for them as well.
not a mansion, not a big, huge house, but a nice place in a nice neighborhood
Oh, yeah, it's very nice. And,
with a little private lake
yeah,
in the
Lake
back.
Truesdale. Yeah.
And then they got the apartment on East 86th Street.
I believe that was the first place, yes.
Okay. Do you know anything about rent controls in New York?
Vaguely, like whatever I read in the paper.
Okay. And after that, they got the place on Riverside Drive.
Yes,
To your knowledge, and I know you had sporadic contact with Kathie, to your knowledge, did they then make the Riverside Drive apartment their primary residence in the city, but their other primary residence was the South Salem house?
that's a good way to characterize it.
Okay. During that time is when Kathie graduated from nursing school,
Correct.
and then she went to Einstein,
Yes.
got accepted at Einstein Medical School.
Yes.
And during that time, I don't know how much contact you had with them, but they lived a good life, didn't they?
Outwardly it looked like they're in Westchester County. They didn't have fancy cars or anything other than the Mercedes, which was used.
But it was a nice Mercedes.
Yeah, I worked on it. It was okay.
And do you know about their nightlife?
I didn't know much about their nightlife, no.
Okay. Had you been to the Riverside Drive apartment?
I think on 2 occasions.
Okay. We've seen pictures here of the building, and the pictures of the building don't show the penthouse part.
Mhm.
You've seen pictures of it, I suppose.
Well, I was there.
Yes, but you've seen pictures of it.
I believe I've seen pictures, over time.
And you can't really see the patio, the outdoor area from the pictures from the
From the
street.
street? No, you can't see that.
But when you get up there, you can see that there was a wide terrace. Maybe that's a better word.
I was out on that terrace and it faces the Hudson River.
Okay. But it goes in a U shape all the way around both apartments on the,
Yeah, I think there was a neighbor that lived on the back side of the building.
okay. And so a person on the terrace could walk all the way around the terrace.
And that's correct.
Were you aware that the neighbors who had a smaller, were you aware that the neighbors had a smaller apartment than Bob and Kathie's?
No,
Did you see the neighbor's apartment?
no.
Okay. So you were not aware that it was mainly glass windows, sliding glass doors?
No.
Okay. Did you ever speak to Kathie, say in the last year before she disappeared, about her cocaine use?
Other than to disapprove that, I'm not going to be judgmental, but
Sure.
it just wasn't my thing.
Well, did you, as a older brother, did you speak to her and say, Kathie, you really shouldn't be using cocaine?
It's possible I had said that once or twice.
Okay. All right, that's all I have at this time, Your Honor. I do want to revisit the issue of the records and the issue.
Okay, so, redirect?
Yes. You were asked questions by Mr. DeGuerin on direct examination about the reward that Robert Durst put up. Do you recall that?
Yes,
You testified that he put up a reward of $100,000, is that correct?
that's correct.
Did the amount of that reward change?
Yes.
Please describe what happened.
Within a couple of weeks, as I recall the timeline, the $100,000 went down to like $15,000. But why?
You also were asked some questions about where your sister was living at the time that she disappeared. Was your understanding that she was primarily residing at the East 86th Street Foundation?
Ask if you know. If you know.
Do you know where your sister was living at or at the time when she disappeared?
Absolutely, East 86th.
And the East 86th Street apartment, that was much closer to Jacoby Hospital, is that correct?
That's correct.
And do you know who was living in the Riverside Drive property primarily at the time when your sister disappeared?
Primarily,
I'm sorry?
Primarily Bob Durst.
And you were also asked some questions about the fact that your sister was living in nice houses. Mr. DeGuerin described it as a bucolic or a good life. Do you recall that?
Yes.
You've now been made aware, Mr. McCormack, of the level of domestic violence that was going on at that time. Is that correct?
Could you say that again, please?
So, Mr. DeGuerin asked you about this bucolic life that your sister was living with nice cars and nice houses. Do you recall those questions?
That was Vermont. That was bucolic.
Right, Vermont.
Nice
Vermont.
cars came later.
Vermont was bucolic, but the questions regarding the nice cars and the lifestyle were later, and I want to...
Okay, you can ask about that. I think the bucolic part takes one's mind to Vermont. Okay, go ahead.
Certainly away from this trial.
It's how I took it. It's a
Just
bucolic.
remember one thing that separates you from the rest of us. You'll get to go home.
Yeah. All right.
So, let me continue, Your Honor.
You may continue.
Mr. McCormick, you were asked questions about the, quote, good life your sister was living with nice houses and fancy cars by Mr. DeGuerin. Do you recall that?
Yes.
You're now aware that in the midst of that good life and fancy cars, that Mr. Durst has admitted that he was emotionally and physically abusing your sister. Is that correct?
Yes.
Do you think, Mr. McCormick, since you were asked, do you think that that was a good life that your sister was living with a man who was physically and emotionally abusing her?
Absolutely not.
Nothing further.
Do you wish me, I'll hear you out on your proposed additional questions. Or not.
I need to retrieve that exhibit, Your Honor.
Okay. Okay.
Take a few minutes to do that.
He didn't mark this as, it wasn't marked specifically.
It wasn't marked. It wasn't marked. He means the. You mean.
What we
oh,
refer to, the
oh.
record from the records from the hospital.
All right. So perhaps one of your team can do that while I hear you out on the other point. You said you wish to. Is that it, or did you wanted to? Or is there some other area, or just that the only area you want to
Well,
inquire
the
about?
other area was the records and the memos that he
Okay,
provided.
so I'll go back with you and the people to hear you out, so we can let this gentleman go home. So let's take care of this and see whether or not you can ask about that.
Well, Holmes
Meanwhile,
is
your
the East Coast.
colleagues will find the document.
Home's the East Coast. I don't think he can go home. Yeah.
Well, yeah, he will, but when you're done.
Eventually.
Yeah, when you're done. Okay, let's go back. Oh, okay, thank you, Mr. Chesnoff. So, yes, let's go back. Should be quick. Might not be. Should be. Should be quick. 5 minutes is
Mr. McCormack, I want to go directly to, you said you were shown some of the records of the medical school about Kathie?
I was not shown. I found them. They were freely available, publicly available on the e-courts website in New York City.
Okay, so you found them. So it wasn't some member of the prosecution that showed them to you?
No,
Did you look at all of them?
no.
Did you look at, man, kept to confer with counsel. Didn't get a
Yes.
chance to when we were back there.
Yes.
Your Honor, I think we'll wait until the proper witness is on the stand to go into the records of the medical school.
Very good, thank you, Mr. DeGarrett. So no further questions, no further cross-examination?
That's correct.
One more question.
Yes, Mr. Lewin? Of course.
You were asked questions by Mr. DeGuerin regarding Kathie's progress and status in medical school. Do you recall that?
Yes.
Your Honor, we have a record. This has already been stipulated. These have been admitted into evidence pursuant to stipulation number. Yeah, hold on a second.
Your Honor, may I offer stipulation?
Yes.
Next order is 25. I have a stack of records called Kathie Durst Registrar File. May I mark this as People's 25?
Yes.
Those documents marked for identification as People's Exhibit 25 are true and correct copies of Kathie Durst Registrar File maintained by the Albert Einstein College of Medicine. So stipulated.
Does that include the ones that were referenced in?
The entire file that was subject to our stipulation.
Okay, yes, absolutely.
This has already been previously stipulated.
Court accepts the stipulation.
Where was this made? Where was it?
He's going to be referring to base 131428 in this document.
I'm going to actually put this up. Mr. DeGuerin and I should not be allowed to touch this.
You let Aziz and I do this.
Yeah, probably, that's what we should do.
Pull it down.
You know, can you put it up, Eugene?
You guys gotta pull it down and then just start.
Hold on.
This is another lawyer joke here.
1, 2, 3.
We have a stipulation. This is going to be records. This is your sister Kathie Durst's radiology clerkship. It is dated December 28, 1981 to January 24th, 1982. This covers up to the week before your sister disappeared. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And I want you to read, please, aloud the narrative evaluation at the bottom, please.
Narrative evaluation. Ms. Durst,
Improper witness.
It's been stipulated, so it's admitted. I can bring it through any witness I want. It's already been admitted into evidence. Or I can read it myself.
That's true also, but here the witnesses rendered an opinion, and this tends to reinforce that opinion, I expect, so you may read it.
thank you, Judge. Ms. Durst is a very pleasant student who displayed keen interest in the subject, although she missed several sessions. She has a fair grasp of the background basic sciences and has sufficient clinical knowledge to be able to arrive at the logical conclusion. She is fairly quick in picking up radiological abnormalities and is a keen observer. She participates actively in group discussions and is eager to do a good job.
And this has ratings, is that correct?
That's correct?
And she got all very goods, is that correct?
Yes, very good, sir.
Are you aware whether or not your sister was planning on applying for a residency program?
I believe she discussed that. She was planning on doing that. I don't know the details.
And have you ever had a chance to review the letter from the dean that went out to the different internships and residency programs?
I believe I did when I looked at the E-Court records.
This is all already admitted, but would you agree, Mr. McCormack, that in fact that letter was very complimentary of your sister, her skills as a physician, and was a recommendation for her to receive a spot in several different internship residency programs in the New York area?
I recall that, yes.
Oh, also, in terms of the struggles that your sister was having earlier in her medical school time, do you know how that time correlates with the defendant physically and mentally abusing her?
I think you could draw the conclusion that her abuse was being...
That's not responsive to the question.
I can
Overall,
answer. Thank you, no further questions.
He didn't answer.
Oh, I thought you did answer.
he said you could draw a correlation.
I could draw a correlation, yes.
Yes,
Thank you.
records, please.
Cross,
Nothing further.
recross.
Do you know if Kathie had an illness in the family in July of '81?
An illness? In whose family?
An illness in her family?
Mom was good. She didn't have a family other than Bob, I mean... But I don't know firsthand.
Well, here's a page from the medical records that are in. This is page LADA 131431. This is the neurology clerkship, July of '81. Kathleen unfortunately had an illness in her family and was unable to complete the clerkship. She plans to make up the missing period later in the year. Are you aware of any such illness?
Only Kathie would have knowledge of that. I was busy starting a marriage.
Well, do you know whether she was ill?
Not reported to me.
Here's another page of the record. It's LADA 131435. It's about a radiology clinic, clerkship.
Can you give the date, Mr. DeGarmo?
Yeah, I'm going to, it's supposed to be focusing. We've got to break it again.
There you go, there you go. Keep your hand on.
It's not focusing. Focus.
The autofocus is off.
I just turned it off.
It's over.
Now it's on.
There you
There we go.
There we go. November 30th, 1980, radiology clinic. Mrs. Durst was unable to attend a large part of the clerkship, mostly due to ill health. So I suggested to her that she should repeat the entire clerkship at a suitable time. I am also disappointed at her lack of responsibility in not returning the books she borrowed from our library in spite of repeated reminders. Do you know of any ill health that she suffered during that period? That's a different different period, it's a little earlier.
No.
Okay. And of course, I know you don't know anything about whether she was returning books or not.
No.
Here's a letter, it's kind of hard to read, but because it's handwriting and it's about an umpteenth copy, but it's from, that doesn't help. I don't think, well, maybe it does. It's from Dr. John L. Cook. That's the French pronunciation, I think. Dear Mrs. Durst, I understand from my office that things aren't going too smoothly for you right now. Would you like to talk to me? Do you think I can help? Sincerely, then sign. Again, were you aware that things weren't going too smoothly for her in March of 1981?
I was not aware of that.
Okay.
It is time for our lunch
One more,
break.
if I could, Your Honor.
If it's the last one, all right.
It's the last one. Well, actually, there's two.
I'm
And I'll
sorry.
do it real quickly.
Make it fast.
All right, here's 13140, a letter from the registrar to Dean Cook, from Dean Cook to the registrar, 10 March 1981. Ms. Durst had withdrawn from the surgery clerkship at wherever it is for personal reasons, effective today. Dr. Wilk informs me that she has satisfactorily passed the clerkship examination. Once, that when she has satisfactory, she will have satisfied the requirements. Were you aware of any personal reasons going on in March of 1981?
No.
Okay.
Your Honor, may I just
And
ask
finally, this is number 131434.
Are you going to redirect? Because we're coming back after lunch,
just
right?
one question I have for him.
Okay, we're going to, any reason we can't come back at 1:30?
Oh, I was just hoping we could get him out, but I totally understand the,
We'll pick it up at 1:30.
Yeah, I've waited 38 years, I can wait 38 minutes.
Okay, thank you for that. Ladies and gentlemen, do not converse among yourselves or with anyone else on any subject connected with this case. Do not form or express any opinion on the case.